So for those who don't know me, I'm Sakhila Mirza, the LBMA General Counsel. And this session is a little bit different. So I'm going to do a quick update on some of the projects that the LBMA has been working on. And then it's going to be followed by a panel session whereby the panelists are going to present on some of the topics that I'm going to highlight. Every year, I always have a disagreement with Ruth. I always say to her, I don't really have much to say. I don't need more than 10 minutes. And every year I run over. And so I'm going to try and stick to my 15 minutes. I'm sure John Reed would prefer I had 3 hours. But John, sign into some webinars, and I'm sure I can cover a lot of the topics in more detail. So with that, I'll get going. So if we go to the first slide. Where are we? Are the slides up? There's no slides. Ah, perfect. So this is, first of all, I thought I'd start with setting the tone. What is the LBMA about? I know you heard Ruth speak yesterday and Paul speak yesterday about the LBMA being the global authority for precious metals. But I wanted to focus a little bit on what is our mission, what is it that we're actually set up to do here. You heard Neil talk about good delivery, which is the crown jewels of the LBMA, but then there's a lot more that we do work on. Maybe people don't appreciate what's going on behind the scenes. A lot is happening. And with each project, each initiative, there are 3 core themes that run through. We make sure we ensure the highest levels of leadership, ensuring that we have the highest levels of integrity, and also enhancing transparency. So those are the 3 key themes that run through every initiative project that the LBMA works on. And I've just highlighted just a few there to support some of the objectives that we've been working on. I'm not going to go through every single one. That's where we do webinars to explain a little bit more about these projects. But I'm going to highlight just a few that have been of particular relevance in the last 12 months. So is there a clicker? Oh, there it is. Yeah. Sorry. So with that, I'm going to do a little bit on trade reporting. Ruth mentioned yesterday that we're going to be announcing the volume on 20th of November. What does that actually mean? What are we exactly announcing? So I'll spend a little bit of time on that, a bit on regulatory developments, but when I say a bit, literally 5 minutes. Going to touch on Brexit, a little bit more on responsible sourcing. We've all heard a lot of emphasis on the ESG agenda. But what is it that the LBMA has actually done by expanding the scope of responsible sourcing? We say we've expanded the scope, but what does it actually mean? And finally, and a topic that I know I've spent a lot of time talking on in the last sort of 2 days at this conference is technology. So, trade reporting. This is a project that was launched 2.5 years ago. And what was expected was for all full LBMA members to report their trade data. I'm happy to say, although it has been a long journey, there's been a lot of challenges en route, there's been a lot of other regulatory requirements that people have had to prioritize. But what's actually been really, really helpful is a genuine commitment to ensure that we as a marketplace can move towards a voluntary reporting regime. So I say it's a voluntary reporting regime because there's no hard regulatory requirement, but we together have come and decided that we are going to help with this transparency agenda, something that was highlighted by the Bank of England, the FCA, and the Treasury in the UK, that then we need more transparency in this market. So we took a decision, again, through market consultation, that we will be reporting on spot, forward, and options. All that trade data will be reported on an aggregate basis. And what we're not interested in, and really want to emphasize this point, is client data. We're not interested in who the client is behind every trade. We're interested in the volume, the price, the day, but not the client data. So that is protected. We're not asking for that. So if there's any concerns, nervousness, come and speak to me. I'll give you a little bit more in terms of how this is being done. We've got legal agreements in place, legal departments, compliance departments, the tech departments, the business. They've all been engaged. There's been a lot of consultation. And I would actually personally like to thank David Gornall, who's made this project personally very easy, much easier for me to manage because there's been a lot of work behind the scenes. And also, working with Simplitium in making sure that we've got the integrity, the security in place to make sure that the data, the security requirements are in place to protect that data. We are now going to be moving towards announcing the aggregate volume. This is going to be done on a weekly basis initially for the first 3 months. So we will be adding up the 5-day aggregate volume and announcing that on a weekly basis. This is to understand what the data looks like, make sure that if there's any sensitivities, we're protecting that, large trades are being protected. We've got a deferrals regime, we've got a de minimis regime. There's a lot of behind this from a governance perspective. And that's all in place. I have a lot more information on that, so come and talk to me if you'd like to understand the governance behind this. And then 3 months later, we will move that 5-day reporting to daily reporting. That's on trade reporting. Let's now move on to the regulatory developments. Typically, the regulatory developments have actually occupied probably 90% of my presentation. This year, I'm spending only a few minutes just to highlight a few key points. First of all, VAT Terminal Markets Order in the UK. Some of you may have heard that the EU is currently challenging the UK's application of the Terminal Markets Order. What is the Terminal Markets Order? Well, for those who are actually trading in the UK markets, this is to help you with giving you a zero-rated VAT benefit. So if you're part of the LBMA, then you can actually benefit from the Terminal Markets Order. So this is where membership of the LBMA is actually very important. We've been engaged with the HMRC, we've been speaking to them, providing them with data, explaining how this market is applying the Terminal Markets Order. And to date, they have confirmed it's business as usual. They've obviously got a lot of work to do with the EU, given the challenge, but for precious metals, as of now, it's business as usual. We remain engaged, we will continue to provide information and monitor this very closely. But if anybody has any questions or if anybody's hearing anything different, please come and speak to myself or Ed Blight, who actually looks after the VAT working group. The other, one of my personal favorites, net stable funding ratio. I have spoken about this for the last 4 years. A lot of work continues, a lot of lobbying efforts, speaking to members, getting more information, getting the market to help us, with what is probably the most significant regulatory, or what could be the most significant regulatory impact. This is about the 85% haircut that the authorities have proposed needs to be imposed on the precious metals market. We believe 85% is too high. We believe that the precious metals market need an exemption for short-term financing transactions and a complete exemption for the clearing and settlement business, that is the London Precious Metals Clearing Limited, LPMCL. We've had a little bit of success. It's been recognized that precious metals are a unique asset class. They're not like any other commodity. So the European Parliament, in its report this summer, actually proposed to lower the 85% haircut to 50%. Whilst it's been a good sign, it's not enough. We want zero. So we're going to continue lobbying, we're going to continue pushing for an exemption and a carve-out. However, one thing I would like to highlight, and given the timetable, because the authorities are looking to conclude and agree this position by the end of this year, is we may not get this exemption, we may not get the carve-out. And if that is the case, we need to make sure we have a contingency plan. The cost of doing business potentially will go up. Liquidity will potentially fall. And it's on the liquidity point that concerns us. So we're going to continue with the lobbying, but we also need a plan B. And we've started those discussions on plan B. Hopefully I'll have more to report on plan B through webinars and possibly at the next conference. But please remain engaged, watch this space, come and talk to us. It is one of the most significant regulatory issues in the market to date. And finally, on the Precious Metals Code, good story there. 95% of the LBMA membership have actually confirmed and adhered to the code. We've had statement of commitments that have been submitted to the LBMA, but we would like 100%. And those who do not get there by the end of this year will be removed from the LBMA membership. However, those who have signed up do not become complacent, because this is about ongoing compliance, ongoing adherence, ongoing public declaration that you are complying with the Precious Metals Code. Business models change, staffing changes. We want you to make sure that you are continually supporting those changes, continually reviewing the Precious Metals Code and applying it to your business. And to help you with that, first of all, we've got an online training module that was developed with the ACI. They also developed the FX online training module, so we've kept them similar. Please contact us, please contact them. It's really useful resource to help you with the changes in staffing, but to make sure that you've got ongoing compliance in place. Additionally, there's a public register on the LBMA website to confirm who's actually complying with the code. We encourage you to visit this website, look at the register, but also another sort of point I would like to emphasize, make this part of your due diligence requirements. Place some emphasis on the Precious Metals Code. You heard one of our keynotes yesterday actually highlight what an important piece of work this is. So again, let's do this, let's work together and make sure we're complying. Right, I've got 5 minutes left in which I have to cover another 10 slides. Let's do this. Brexit, there's a webinar at the end of next month. Paul Fisher will be hosting this. The only point I want to make on this, precious metals market, we're a global market. London remains open for business. Access continues. So from our perspective, nothing should hopefully change for precious metals. That said, members are adopting risk mitigation strategies. Some members are looking at becoming accredited as an authorized economic operator. Some are looking at setting up entities in Europe to help with the European businesses. They're looking at the LBMA to get membership for those European entities. Come and speak to us. I know on the authorized economic operator, again, this is something that Ed Blight is, sorry Ed, I'm sort of called you out twice now, but he's been leading on. So again, I'd encourage you to speak to him and speak to him about membership of the European entity as well. And finally, there's a call for action. What is everybody else doing to address some of the potential perceived risks that they think they will face depending on how Brexit pans out? Otherwise, webinar at the end of next month. A little bit on responsible sourcing. We're going to hear from Sasha shortly in terms of the challenges that still remain as far as responsible sourcing is concerned. A lot of good work has been done. A lot of emphasis in this conference has been placed on all the good work that is in place and that we're continuing to do. ESG goes without saying. The LBMA has been collaborating with the producers, and we've launched version 8 for consultation. The key changes in version 8 is this requirement to have policies and procedures in place. Is this a requirement to actually be engaged, to identify your risks and show how you're addressing those risks? Communication is very important. Obviously, the audit reports are equally as important, if not more important. Making sure you've got corrective action plans for when those audit reports do come back and highlight potential low to medium risk, that you're actually actioning those corrective action plans. And again, on the ESG agenda, we're going to hear a little bit more from Peter Sinclair from Barracks, give his perspective on large scale as well as ASM mining. Another issue that sort of continues to be sort of covered in the press is that of fraud. Neil alluded to it in his presentation earlier, making sure we don't have imposters in the market, making sure that we've got some sort of controls, risks, mitigation in place to address this risk of fraud. Is the gold bar what it says on the tin? And I will talk about that in a second when it comes to technology and how technology can help. The other buzzword that we've seen in the last few years, and more so recently, blockchain. Fortunately, we had another great keynote speak yesterday who actually explained blockchain, so I don't need to do that. And he obviously did a much better job than I would do in explaining blockchain. But it is a buzzword. A lot of people talk about it. Some people I question if they understand what they're talking about. Sometimes I question whether I understand what I'm talking about. But we have to work together in helping each other understand what is the market about, what is technology looking to do, and how can we get the governance right to bring all that together. And that is exactly what the LBMA is doing when it comes to technology. So moving on to the request for proposal that we issued earlier this year. I've had numerous conversations on this topic, to the point that I wish I had actually spoken a little bit earlier yesterday, so it could have actually saved me a lot of time. The key message I've been repeating as far as the response, the RFP is concerned, is we're trying to understand how can technology help. Can technology actually add efficiencies to the responsible supply chain, to responsible sourcing program, to our supply chain provenance, the risks we've identified there, to security feature? Can technology actually add efficiencies? Is it worth investing in this? It's going to be a cost. Clearly, it's going to be a cost, but how do we make sure that the costs don't outweigh the benefits? So getting that balance right. So we have been speaking to a number of service providers, 26 to be precise. Some great ideas, some interesting ideas, but what we're trying to do, we are trying to understand that and apply it to this market. So a lot of work. We actually, I mean, this slide just shows the kind of questions we've been asking service providers. What is it that they can offer? How will they go through with implementation? How will this work? Is it user-friendly? How user-friendly? We've got a lot of information together. We've consolidated a lot of that information. And the main reason why the LBMA is doing this is to help you all, because a number of market participants have approached us and said, we've got X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F approaching us, wanting to explain that they've got the perfect solution when it comes to supply chain and technology. So they don't know who to support. They don't know which ecosystem they should be part of. How do they make that decision? And this is where the LBMA is stepping in. We're going to help facilitate some of that decision-making process. How? We've got a working group that represents the cross-section of the market, of the supply chain, from your producers all the way to your downstream. And a lot of that working group is actually represented outside of the LBMA membership. So we've got LBMA members, but we've also got non-members who are very interested in how this process is going to actually pan out. So the working group has met. We had about 40 organizations that were represented. We've then had to split the working group into focus groups to really focus on targeted questions, targeted issues. And the general consensus has been, we are not going to recognize just one technology solution or one technology provider. We are going to hopefully recognize multiple. I don't have a magic number as to what that multiple means. But the idea is, in order to recognize what's a good, credible blockchain solution, should blockchain be the way we want to go, we need to understand what that criteria is from the market. What are those standards? What's, again, the governance process? What's the data management strategy? And actually, data management is very important. Data is power these days, and a lot of decisions rely on good data. So whilst the technology piece, and I've come to realize, actually the technology piece is the easy piece here, and I'm not sort of undermining the challenges and the complications that technology can bring, but it's relatively easy. The difficult bit is actually the data side, the data management side, the policy, the standards, the enforcement, the criteria, making sure we're getting all that right. Obviously, recognizing multiple solutions, and I know I've been challenged on this, will it fragment the market? Does this mean you're going to have lots of solutions with lots of potential blockchain solutions with market participants divided as to which blockchain solution they join? What does that mean for the market? How does blockchain A speak to blockchain B? I don't have the answers to this, but we are working through the answers. In fact, at this point in time, there are more questions on blockchain than there are answers. But the good news is, and it gives me a lot of comfort, when I've spoken to other asset classes, other markets, energy markets, the agricultural markets, they've also got very similar questions. They're also using slightly similar processes, but the difference is, for the precious metals market, you've got the LBMA. With a lot of the other markets, they're setting up consortiums, they're setting up sort of their own proprietary solutions, and I know that is also happening here. But what the LBMA is doing is trying to bring that together in one place, creating a hub so we can actually try and resolve some of those questions. First ask the questions and then try and resolve those questions. This slide just highlights some of the thinking when it comes to criteria. It's not rocket science, a lot of it. What kind of criteria are we going to be looking at? How are we going to provide that data? How are we going to flesh that out? It's a huge piece of work, and as the timeline is going to highlight, I was slightly ambitious when I launched the RFP in thinking that I might have the process concluded by Q1 next year. I say slightly ambitious, overly ambitious is probably the right term. So actually, first half of next year is when we're hoping to have the standards, the criteria, near enough final stage, have the consultation out for Q1, and have a draft ready by the end of the first half of next year. And then moving on to the second stage is then going back to the service providers and trying to understand which of their service providers do meet that criteria, and then trying to understand which is a credible solution and which doesn't quite meet the criteria that we've set out. If you would like more information on this RFP process, the gold bar integrity, come and speak to me. I can share a lot more detail. And again, we're being very open with the information we're sharing. Service providers are obviously engaged. One group I didn't mention who are engaged are the refiners group, but we just have to mention conflicts of interest and confidentiality. So there's a lot behind that we need to make sure we're managing, getting it right, proprietary information. There's a lot of competitors in the room. We need to make sure that we're just managing that information and flow appropriately. So come and speak to me. I know we're sort of nearing the end of the conference today, but get in touch with me when we're back in your offices. Let's set up those calls and those meetings. So I've gone way over my time. Sorry, Ruth. So I lost the bet again. And so with that, I'm going to now move over to the panel session. It's going to be, again, you're going to have 4 fantastic presentations on some of the issues I've already highlighted from the experts. So with that, can I please welcome the panel onto stage?